You're now listening to the Something Good Podcast Network. Please press any key to continue.
A kiss, as defined by Dan Webster, is something pleasing, a caress, a gentle touch. But there's another kiss that isn't in Webster's.
Hey world, we're kids!
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise.
Yeah, Kiss sucks!
Kiss implies the extreme in the theatrics on stage, utilizing fire and smoke and bizarre costumes, and the ever-consistent, constant concealment of their true identities.
Speaking of which, Kiss is going to have its own comic book soon.
Take Kiss with you. It's fun. Show your friends and be the first. Now.
Oh my God, no time to turn!
Welcome once again, everyone, to No Time to Turn, a Kiss nerd podcast.
Nerds.
We are charting the history of Kiss, album by album, year by year. And as always, we have to qualify this by saying we are not experts, nor do we claim to be experts. We're just...
We know a lot.
We know stuff. We're just going to talk about the stuff.
I know
that
a
we
thing
know.
or two.
Yeah.
And yeah. So
about them.
I had a friend of mine that was listening to the show and said that I told him he should be on the show at some point, and he replied by saying, I'm just another opinionated Kiss fan. Well, you know what? So are we.
Yeah,
that's just all we are.
Everyone's an opinionated Kiss fan, and opinions are like assholes. Everyone has one, and they all stink.
Gene Simmons asshole, 2004.
and that one most definitely stinks.
Well, what are we going to be getting into today?
Well, I guess we're going to kind of pick up where we left off, where I think we are in the middle of their first tour.
Yeah.
And Kiss are not exactly conquering the world yet. They're not setting the world on fire, but they are making inroads slowly but surely. They're an anomaly on the live touring circuit with their unusual show.
Yeah, they started doing fire engine lights and drum risers and, a lot of the mainstay, tricks
the
the live show would
levitating
do.
drum riser, which was has famously been discussed, operated with
like a
ropes and chain.
I was picturing it just being warbly as hell.
And being hand raised every night. Their road crew is a notorious gang of probably
degenerates
the best way, degenerates and thugs. They're
just picture
guys,
your 70s roadie.
you can see some of this in some of the existing video of the time where you see these guys, and they're led by a guy named Rick Stewart, if I remember right. And this guy was not a big guy, but I think they all carried themselves in a way as to be pretty intimidating, and they were all deeply committed and supportive of the group, which of course was very important. But they're showing up at the shows wearing studded leather wristbands and leather jackets and mirrored sunglasses, and sometimes they're getting mistaken as being members of the band, and they're not. They're just the road crew.
Meanwhile, the guys in the band are just kind of like, he's cool, right?
Yeah. And, we aren't in the era of limousines and tour buses and a fleet of tractor trailer rigs carrying their equipment. These are guys traveling in the back of a station wagon, being shoestrung along on a overextended American Express card. There's no money in play yet. It's all just... Oh, we'll pay you later.
Yeah, and to even kind of exemplify all of that, something we were kind of discussing off microphone, which is, when we start talking about these first three records, a lot of it kind of all ties together because they were extremely prolific during those first couple of years. They did not break. So during this first Kiss tour, it started February 5th of 74, ended October 4th, 74, and then the Higher Than Hell tour kicked off immediately October 16th, 74.
Yeah.
And then ended February 22nd, 75, with Dress to Kill kicking off March 19th.
Yeah, so all this touring is going nonstop basically on up through 1975.
Yeah.
And really deep into 76, which we'll get there. But in the moment, it's 1974. They're touring pretty hardcore. I think it's interesting to note that they're playing the Rust Belt if I guess you want to call it the Midwest, Great Lakes region.
Yeah.
I've counted it's at least 20 times that they're playing between Lower Ontario and on through Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, all kind of roped around where the Great Lakes are.
Basically, yeah.
And that's going to prove very important to them. I think it's worthy of note that this is going to be the area that kind of breaks them initially, and you can see they're heavily concentrated in this region, in this era.
And what's also interesting, looking at this first tour, so they were kind of hitting all that area in early April. Since all three of us here are based in Charlotte, North Carolina, of course, I have to pull up to see what that location was. So we had April 21st, 74, Charlotte, North Carolina at Flashes.
A club called Flashes, which was way out on North Tryon in Charlotte, which is now kind of closer to what is the known as the university area.
Oh, shit, okay.
That building hosted a number of different clubs up until about the late 80s when it burned down.
Oh, wow. Okay. Did you ever get to go?
No, I never went there. I met a guy that was at that Kiss show, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I can't remember his name, but he played with a guy named Scott Savage, who just recently passed away. He was a local luminary here in Charlotte. And what stuck in my head that I remember him telling me, this has been 30 years ago since I talked to this guy, but he talked about that the opening band had a similar kind of stage show thing going on.
Interesting.
And I've looked that up since, and I thought it was the band ISIS, which was another, I think, New York band that was doing a theatrical presentation, but they were more of it was different than Kiss. It was like an ensemble thing. So I'm not exactly sure what the deal was. But this band was called Ritual, and I don't know anything about them. But that's local lore, local stuff, whatever.
But of course, we have to
mention it because this is us. This is our thing. I'll tell you what's interesting is I lived across the street 30 years ago from a guy that was a major league Blue Oyster Cult fan. He was somewhere on Long Island he grew up. And we got to talking one day, and he was telling me about how much he loved Blue Oyster Cult, and he would never miss any of their shows back in the day. And I was like, oh yeah, I like Blue Oyster Cult, but I'm more of a Kiss fan, He's like, yeah, I never much cared for Kiss, but this guy had Blue Oyster Cult. He was bragged about like he had a T-shirt collection because he had like a tour shirt from every tour they ever did.
Oh wow, yeah.
And he was like, we're Kiss nerds. He was a Blue Oyster Cult nerd. And he starts to tell me, he goes, well, I saw Kiss one time. He goes, yeah, they played with Blue Oyster Cult. It was like he goes, I think it was either New Year's Eve or 4th of July. And I was like, huh? And he's like, yeah. And, well, he goes, they were playing, it was New Year's. He goes, he knew somebody on the Blue Oyster Cult rook or something, or maybe it was somebody that worked at the Academy of Music. I don't remember, but it was somebody he knew that greased him in to see shows there. And he told me the whole story, Kiss were unannounced. And everyone were like, what the hell is this? And he goes, and the guy caught his hair on fire, and the roadie guy came over and put it out. And we were just like, God damn, And I'm sitting there, with my eyes wide open, with my jaw to the floor. I was like, you saw that? I'm like, you don't understand. This is like a famous story in Kiss lore, I'm like, everybody knows that story. He didn't know anything about it. He just remembered it from, because he knew nothing of Kiss.
Wow.
To him, it was just some annoying band.
And how weird is it that, in rural North Carolina, I ended up moving across the street from a guy that was there.
Yeah, right. And also talking about other really cool shows on this tour. Something you posted on your Instagram today. I would assume this is probably from that first tour, considering the logo they decided to use. You posted a New York Dolls and Kiss event from June 12th in Flint,
Michigan. They played 2 or 3 shows with the Dolls. They also played that same week. They played Cleveland and I forget where else.
Oh, right here. I actually was able to pull it up since that was correct. Toronto. And they played up in Canada with New York Dolls. Yeah.
Where would that have been?
Ontario.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but where in Ontario?
Toronto.
Toronto. See, that's what I'm saying. Lower Ontario. They would play Toronto and London, which is in between Detroit and Toronto.
But no, man, that to me would be a time machine show. I would love to go back to see that.
Yeah, well, that's it's interesting to me. They didn't probably package that more often and more frequently. But I think, we've talked about this. For whatever reason, Kiss connected with people in a way the Dolls never did. And we can go into the reasons why. I think, because, I mean, we all love the Dolls, and it's difficult to see with hindsight from our perspective why that didn't connect in a similar fashion, but for whatever reason it didn't.
I think just society norms.
They couldn't quite grasp what it was. I think the Dolls were trying to do. They didn't see it as campy. They were taking it at face value. They probably thought these guys are a bunch of homosexuals.
They're going to
threaten our fabric of life.
But the Dolls kind of like thrived in their corner, though, didn't they? Whereas Kiss had to expand to find and thrive.
How explain?
Like with New York Dolls, you never heard about any tours that got them anywhere outside of New York or anything like that. And with Kiss, they would have to take support tours with Argent or go out with Rush and bands like that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what the Doll story there is. There's it seemed to have connected pretty well in Los Angeles too, but. And you would think, okay, well, they're hitting the two major media markets from the East Coast and West Coast, but, without having that connection in the Midwest, which is the point I'm trying to make with Kiss.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Which was very much a working class, denim and flannel kind of, I don't know,
meat and potatoes kind of thing.
I think anything that was perceived as too fey was not going to be as readily embraced. Now I think the Dolls probably did okay, but not obviously it wasn't enough to carry it over. This is only speculation. I can't really figure out exactly what happened there, but.
And then actually, to kind of keep it on the same topic of this tour, a few dates after, they did 3 shows back to back with a band called Outlaw. And they did the 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd, all in Atlanta.
Yeah, that would have been. There was a club down there called, I think it's called the Electric Circus.
Alex Cooley's Electric
Ballroom.
Yeah,
that would have been like they would have done a series of shows.
Oh, kind of like a residency
for the week or whatever. That was, that wasn't entirely uncommon back then. It was probably a little more uncommon for Kiss.
Mm-hmm.
But that would, like, back in the day, you would have groups take over like Max's for a week or the Bitter End later on. Lou Reed played a lot of, week-long residencies at places in New York as opposed to playing a larger hall for one night. They would play a smaller room for a series of nights.
Right.
Yeah, because they did June 19th through the 22nd there, and then they came right back around with July 17th and 18th back at the same place with a different band, Fat Chance. But then again, we got to throw it back to our folks. Literally the next day, back up in North Carolina in Fayetteville, with Blue Oyster Cult, Nazareth, and Glass Moon at the Cumberland Auditorium.
Okay, yeah, that would be a show to see.
But
that was probably Kiss opening on that bill.
Oh, yeah, this was still first album tour.
I would assume Nazareth was the headliner on that. I don't know.
Check out the lineup on this date. On September 30th, 1974 in Evansville, Indiana. It's Kiss, Billy Preston, and Rush.
Yeah, that's an unusual bill.
Yeah. There's the time machine.
But I still think it would be a fun show to go see.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't mind seeing that.
This is like pre-Neil Peart Rush, too.
Yeah, that was when Rush was still a
working man.
A good band to me. I don't care for the...
Oh, you're one of those.
Yeah, I don't care for the post-first album Rush.
I see you. I see you.
Yeah.
Rush fans are kind of like Kiss fans. They're real prickly, and they get kicked. They get their asses kicked as teenagers a lot.
Well, actually, kind of falling in, we've kind of lined ourselves up perfectly here. So with Kat mentioning that September date, basically they just ran super hardcore all the way up until October. And then they take a small break in, they took a break in August of 74 to record their follow-up record, Hotter Than Hell.
Okay, what do you have for that? The dates on that? That was recorded in August of 74?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I've got here. Yeah, so that was, they kind of take a break in the middle of that first tour, kind of after the Atlanta dates, or right before the Atlanta dates, rather, in September. And should we just go ahead and roll on into talking about tracks, or we want to go ahead and talk about producers and sound and stuff like that?
I kind of want to talk about how this record kind of made a really big impression on me when I first, was exposed to it. I was over at my friend's place, the same guy I mentioned earlier that I talked to over the show. I'll give him some love, Jordan Turnage. Miss you, buddy. I was over at his place, and his dad was the record collection guy.
Got it.
And he had Kiss Alive, Hotter Than Hell, and a bunch of others. But I think Hotter Than Hell stuck with me because of the aesthetic of the album cover and like the spread and all that too. There's like a little bit of the Japanese manga style and all that. I don't know, for some reason the aesthetic of that whole record stuck with me, and it was even back then when I first listened to it, I was like, this album sounds weird and I have no idea why.
It is a weird sounding record, but let's kind of go into, I wonder, so what do you suspect was the rationale that they were going to take this and record it in Los Angeles?
I mean, we can kind of go by, what they have said. Paul was saying that it was kind of out of necessity, that they were just on the road and that they wound up in LA and it just wound up working. So they recorded the record in LA and were trying to get a heavier sound because he just really was not happy with the way the debut record was turning out. He's saying the guitar sounded thin, it wasn't punchy. Without saying it, it sounded like he said they wanted a bit more of a Black Sabbath tone.
I keep seeing that. I don't see how they would I don't see how you could land those songs into that kind of a sound.
Even like Going Blind?
Yeah, especially Going Blind, because knowing knowing what I know about it. But I'm before we get all to that, what they obviously, for whatever dissatisfaction they had with the first album, they still either didn't have enough say so with the record company, or they felt comfortable enough and satisfied enough to use the same production crew with Richie Wise and Kenny Kerner. So it's the same team going in for round two, and what was my point is, they obviously now say, we had to do this, or this was not what we wanted, or blah 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 blah. But I'm questioning that, because at some point, I think they were on a small enough kind of scale that they could probably successfully lobby to go, we didn't think the first album turned out so good, we've got to improve upon it, let's get somebody else in with some fresher ideas, blah blah blah. But none of this seems to have been discussed. It's like, okay, these are the guys, let's go. And that makes sense too.
It honestly might come from a money aspect, because the one that everyone has said is that everyone was flat broke during this time. So maybe it would cost more to try and get new hands, where maybe they had some sort of greasing the palm deal in the back that we've not really heard or discussed.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe
I think all that was not outside the realm of possibility, but I suspect that the truth of the situation is that they went with what they were comfortable with, working with the person they've already worked with, now they've established a relationship with, and it was kind of like, okay, it probably didn't put a whole lot of thought into it, and they probably weren't as dissatisfied with that first record as they would become later on. I think at the moment they're probably still pretty jazzed that they even had a record.
Right.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know, but it just seems kind of, it goes against their own hyperbole to go, because of course with Kiss everything was perfect and fully formed as it came out of the box.
I do find it interesting, though, that so many similar personnel on this record versus the first one, and it got such a different sound.
Yeah, that's always been a curiosity, because it sounds like it was recorded through like a plastic pipe.
I know it.
And that's been
recorded through a plastic pipe and mastered through a cardboard box.
Yeah, it's a weird sounding record. It's just all that compression that they've used on it. And I think at the time, what they were probably going for was something that was very advanced sounding. Mm-hmm. But instead of sounding very advanced, it sounded very kind of weird. I don't know. It's a weird record. It's always sounded weird to me. But even when I was a kid listening to it, I knew something was odd sounding about it, but it never occurred. You don't think that deeply into it. As you get older, you start going, yeah, gee, this does sound kind of weird.
And before I started paying attention to like release dates and everything, I actually thought Hotter Than Hell was their first record because of the way it sounded.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it's like before I really learned the order of everything, I just heard how grungy that sounded, and I was like, oh, well, this has to be the first record, and then everything else after that sounded crystal clear, so that must be after they got the money.
Well, but at this point in the game, looking back with hindsight, would you want it to sound any other way?
That's the thing too. It kind of adds to the whole vibe of the record with the art and like that's individual. Personality of a, that sounds like so weird, doesn't it? But it's like it's its own vibe. It's its own, identity.
Yeah,
it gives kind of like raw power. You know what I mean? If you mess with it, it kind of takes away from it.
Well, that's the other thing that I keep going back to is that this sort of highly compressed kind of trebly kind of sound that a lot of these records were doing at that time was kind of an industry kind of thing. I don't know. And so I look at it as kind of part of this time wave of,
early 70s
kind of production style, that it was very advanced sounding for its time. But
to maybe break it down a little further, kind of really thinking about each instrument and the way it sounds in the mix, I think maybe if they had just a different snare tone, people might not talk about it as much. But the snare, I think, is the big outlier, because the guitars, sure, they're a little muddy, but exactly what you are saying. I mean, you got the raw power guitars. I mean, you could still have a powerful guitar sound like that. I think that snare just having such a weird tone to it is what sets that record off on that weird production kilter. I think if everything else had been fine, I don't think it would be discussed nearly as much.
It has kind of like a distortion on the drums too. It sounds like every snare hit sounds like it's getting like a piece of paper crumpled with it at the same time.
Yeah, but it's like all of us here, taking our times in studios, we've heard, the way different things can get layered. And I think the bass, kind of mentally hearing it in my head, the bass isn't too bad. Ace's guitar solos always cut clear and really nice. Paul had a good tone on stuff like Going Blind and Coming Home. I think it's the drums.
The drums and like the acoustic guitars on Coming Home are kind of weird.
On the recorded version?
And Going Blind, just kind of like that weird, kind of like fuzzy,
Do you think there's acoustic on that?
I've never heard acoustic on that. That's interesting.
Well, the clean guitar sounds. If it's not an acoustic,
they may have doubled it, but I think I know they did that when in Dressed to Kill, but I don't know if they were doing it that early or not. But
I was gonna say, I think you're referring to the guitar tone I was talking about, and that's Paul's tone.
Okay, the kind of cleaner one that was kind of
clean and kind of jangly. That's Paul's kind of open chord stuff on those records.
That and Going Blind too. That's just kind of like it just sounds like I said, it has its own vibe, but it still sounds kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's kind of look at it track to track here, because to me it sounds a little disjointed, this album. Like, you kind of can tell they're kind of reaching for maybe some existing scraps and trying to flesh them out without finding any kind of cohesive kind of line, I guess, for the whole album to come together as an album. So
I'd agree with that.
There's stuff on that is a little bit, it's kind of like left field for them in a way, and in a way that they would never really kind of come back to. So there's some unusual stuff in it, but then there's stuff in it that seems to me is like absolutely quintessential Kiss.
Absolutely.
And stuff that people don't always necessarily acknowledge that I think was very, very obvious to me, and that is, I think there's a lot of influence from R&B in this. And when I hear Got to Choose with the big guitar, wow, whatever, I hear a horn section.
Oh, I never would have made that connection.
I could hear that song transitioning very easily into like a big kind of like, soul, funk, whatever kind of a thing.
I never put those pieces together either, but that makes absolute sense.
There's a ton of songs that we'll go into as we go into other albums where I can hear guitars kind of doing what I think would be in any other situation a horn section.
And actually, before we actually go into the track by track, this is one of the few records, I'm going to throw it off kilter for a second. I'm not used to the real track listing of this record because this was my first experience with Hotter Than Hell. I'm holding in my hand right now an old 70s cassette tape of Hotter Than Hell.
That's not a 70s cassette tape.
Is it not a 70s cassette tape? That's the cream one?
No, it's Polygram, so this was in the 80s.
Okay. Well, then an 80s reissue, but if you look at the back, Russ, what does the record end with?
Oh, that's weird.
It ends with Coming Home.
Yeah, this is a complete different
track listing.
So
well,
let's see. Yeah. I didn't know this existed.
Yeah, so my first real experience with Hotter Than Hell was always with that cassette tape. That was an old tape Mom had. So in my head, that record always ends with Coming Home.
Right, that's weird. That would never. Yeah, I can see how that would throw you kind of sideways.
Oh yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out real quick. That there is a weird alternate on the what'd you say, Polygram? This was
somebody somewhere once kind of cataloged all this stuff and notated all the differences between the.
Oh, the Kiss FAQ has a ton of that stuff.
Oh, is it on there? Okay, well, then that would be for Kiss nerds to go and explore. Maybe I'm violating Kiss nerd code of ethic by not knowing that, but I was unaware that the Polygram tape was a different track order.
We just broke everybody's brain with that.
Honestly, a little bit. So I'm gonna go a quick comparison of side 1 and side 2 because it is a little shifty. It's odd. So official release that everyone's used to. We've got to Choose, Parasite, Going Blind, Hotter Than Hell, Let Me Go, Rock and Roll.
Right.
On the cassette tape that I grew up with, it was Got to Choose, Strange Ways, Going Blind, Hotter Than Hell, Let Me Go, Rock and Roll.
Well, that only alternates one song for the other on that, but when you get to side 2, it's completely different.
Yeah, side 2, official release, All the Way, Watching You, Mainline, Coming Home, Strange Ways. Side 2 on the cassette tape was Parasite, All the Way, Watching You, Mainline, Coming Home. So it's very odd. I almost prefer the cassette tape lineup.
That's what you grew up with. You're gonna, Well, let's stick to the original album order. I mean, you like I said, you go through and you start with
Got to Choose.
Yeah,
and
that was an early favorite of mine.
I can hear those as big horn parts, those guitar parts. So you got that.
And you know what? What's interesting is now with you saying that would have been a cool thing for them to do with the symphony.
Well, yeah, I guess. I'm not a fan of that symphony thing, but we'll get to that. But I think it's more clever the way they're doing it. I think it shows a lot of the, I hate to use the word intelligence. I wouldn't say intelligence, but it's pretty creative that they're coming up with these parts and putting it together in the way they are. Mm-hmm. Even the lead part on that is a very simple kind of lead. It's not a lot of scales and stuff. He's kind of playing.
It's real melodic. That's the thing that people forget about Ace. He wrote really melodic, solos where it all mattered to where, like, if you throw one note off, it's going to mess up the whole thing.
It really serviced that song really well, and I think it's a good, strong opening song. And then, of course, it follows into Parasite.
Just a ripper.
Which is, again, quintessential kind of, I mean, that riff is pretty killer.
And Paul actually references in his book, he says that Boomerang's 99.5 Won't Do kind of launched the inspiration for the riff of Got to Choose.
Okay, so I think I probably read that somewhere, but I've never gone back to listen to the...
Oddly enough, Paul's book has been one of the more, like, in-depth things. Like, when Gene talks about being in the studio, he talks about, like, what he thought about being in the studio. And Ace talks about, and I recorded guitars, and Peter's like, and they didn't let me do my shit. Paul's the only one that is like, the inspirations for this came from this. We were using these kind of recorders, and we recorded it on this day. He seems like the only one that actually kept a better log of that.
Paul always seemed to have, his writing style always seemed to have, trying to figure out a right way to say this. He was always kind of a good copier.
Yeah.
of existing styles. He's always in of the moment, I think, but it's always filtered through the Kiss thing.
Yeah.
It kind of gives it its originality. But if you kind of listen, even all the way through the band's history, Kiss, Paul's always tried to stay very contemporary. I don't think the other, certainly not with Gene. I don't think Gene was ever quite concerned about whether or not it sounded contemporary or not. Gene was going to write what he's going to write, and here it is. But I don't think Gene was quite as uptight about what got used and what didn't as Paul did.
Well, because Gene notoriously was saying, and also we kind of see proof of it. He's not just being hot-headed. We see it with his vault. Dude could write, 5 songs a week. So it's like, oh, you didn't like this one? Okay, cool. I'll come back tomorrow with another one.
Here's a new one, yeah.
Yeah, so he seemed to not mind
Paul
as much.
put a lot of time into it, but Paul seems to reflect a lot of his influence, and there's nothing wrong with that, and especially at this stage in the game, because they're like, and I think they've even said as much that they were kind of reaching for ideas at this point, because they already, when you go into your first album, you've got, a lifetime's worth of material to draw from. Now you're into your second one. It's like, hey, got to have new songs. Let's go.
So we're only a few months into our second or in our first year of being a band.
I mean, the first album came out, in February of '74, and here they are in August already having to come up with second record, and it's like, let's go. We got to produce.
Yeah, and to work on what you said, I had this just as a note for when we got to it. But yeah, the two rehashes or the reworks they were doing was Watching You and Let Me Go Rock and Roll. Those were leftovers from the first album sessions.
Yeah, leftovers from the Wicked Lester
songs, leftover songs, not recordings.
No, not recordings, but leftover songs.
Well, correct. Watching You was on the demo. I think Watching You is a killer song. I can't believe that didn't make it onto the first album when they put something like
I'd agree with that.
Love Theme from Kiss on it instead. I'm like, wait, what? Huh? That doesn't make sense. But going through, let's keep it on the song. Parasite.
Ace Frehley, right? Oh yeah, we got to choose was a Paul Stanley, right, on that one. Parasite, Ace Frehley, lead vocal Gene Simmons,
and Gene also allegedly wrote, as with that kind of middle part on
a rhythm guitar or something like that.
Well, he wrote in Cold Gin, he did the
that sounds like something you could write on a bass.
And I think with Parasite, the same thing, like similar kind of thing where he does. I see, I'm getting them flipped in my head now, talking about them at the same time.
But they have similar kind of vibes to them anyway.
But Ace plays bass on the track Parasite too.
See, I'm not aware of that, but it doesn't surprise me. I don't know how often that kind of stuff would happen, but yeah.
Well, who was quoted as saying that one?
Wikipedia.
There you go. You never know. You can't. You got to take that with a. But But it's very likely. I don't think that was unusual, and I think they've pretty much copped to that. And there are moments where it was like it was quicker and easier for someone to do something. They'd be like, "Oh, Ace knows this. Just do it."
Yeah.
Especially because that riff is like kind of weird too. Like it's kind of unorthodox, really.
It's not. Yeah. There's a quote I read where Ace was talking about when he came back, and they had gotten to play it with Bruce Kulick, and he played it much more of a musician style where it was a lot more staccato. And Ace's is a lot more from a wrist, kind of sloppy, kind of whatever. And I hate to use the word sloppy, but just loose.
Loose is good, yeah.
Which gives it its style to me.
Personality,
And that's all that leads into what makes these songs. It's those little things that makes the song great. Takes the song from being good to great. And when they took it and gave it to Bruce Kulick, nothing against Bruce Kulick whatsoever. I'm not gonna, seems like a nice person, but it's not my style. It doesn't suit me. And so that's where you take a great song and just merely make it good.
Did you not like Anthrax version of Parasite?
I don't know that I ever took the time or had the want to hear it.
There's a fantastic, by fantastic I mean awful version of Parasite that John 5 did with Ace not too long ago.
Yeah, that showed up on the Ace Origins record
I don't
recently.
think I have an interest in hearing that either at this point.
No, all you need to know is, imagine that little riff of the beginning riff. Imagine Ace playing the riff, but the John 5 guitar in the background kind of going that feedbacky. Getting louder and louder.
I wouldn't know that guy if I heard him.
Well, just imagine.
I don't think I'd know that guy if he walked up to me and spit me in the face. But I will say this: at this point in the game, I'm of a mind where I say there are a lot of great guitar players in rock and roll, but there ain't a lot of great rock and roll guitar players.
Ooh. Put that on a t-shirt.
Well, I mean, it's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
You know what? I mean, you know, I'm not going to sit here and it's like, I don't know these guys personally, so it's not like a personal thing, but, you know, I would forever and ever rather hear a sloppy Ace Frehley guitar solo than listen to one, you know, perfectly executed Eddie Van Halen anything.
Yeah.
Any day of the week, because Eddie Van Halen interests me about as much as studying, you know, British literature from the 16th century.
See, that was me with Yngwie Malmsteen.
Bores me to, I mean, there's just nothing interesting to me about that at all.
Yeah.
Zero.
And I mean,
and
to
I
pull it
understand
back
why
to
it
Kiss.
got, I know that there's connection. We'll get to all that.
Oh, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say, but to pull my connection to Kiss with that is the differences, and we're going to turn it into this, is just related because Paul recently mentioned it almost in your exact words, saying that's why he preferred having Tommy in the band because he was consistent. He was being asked, because at the time of recording this, the Kiss Off the Soundboard 2001 recording came out with Eric Singer and Ace Frehley lineup. And they were asking Paul, in reflection to Ace's guitar playing, what did you think of this recording? And he said, well, he's a very erratic player. We didn't know what we were going to get. With Tommy, he's a lot more of a reliable, consistent player. So that even kind of falls into what you were saying. You're like, well, that bores me.
Yeah. Well, that erratic kind of thing is what kind of gives it, again, its style. It makes it interesting. And yeah, sometimes it's bad, but
that point, though, you don't know what you're going to get. There's kind of an excitement to that.
There's an excitement.
Yeah.
And there's a little more of an emotion to it. But, you know, that's... but most people have been kind of trained into this idea, which I think is sort of the kind of came through the British scholars, the Eric Claptons and Jeff Becks and these kind of guys that, you know, they were, like I said, scholars. They were academic. And they didn't necessarily feel the music they were playing because it was filtered through this academic kind of knowledge. So it's more brain than heart. And even if it has more heart, it has more heart than balls.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a great thing that I read once by a British journalist named John Savage, who said something about Americans could do something the British could never do, and that is just unselfconsciously rock the fuck out. You know, he goes, the British guys can, this is a British journalist acknowledging, you know, we had to kind of, we had to take a different angle into this and learn it a different way.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not to say there weren't British groups that could not, you know, that just did rock the fuck out. But generally, as a whole, you know, and I think that spilled over, though. That influence came into the American idea and, you know, via all the ones that I just said.
Yeah.
You know, these kind of academic British groups. Then you had, you know, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes. And
all these guys that were Ace's heroes and everything, too.
Well, yeah, to a degree. But Ace, I don't think, played like that. And you know, so you get to this neoclassical kind of guitar playing, which leads into the 80s. And then it became...
That's not impressive anymore.
It was
after
like
a
watching
minute.
a stenographer work, you know. It was
Side
just,
note, I don't think I've listened to a single Emerson, Lake and Palmer song, but I've heard so many people use that band as like the basis of bullshit.
70s. They were a big band in the early 70s. I think it's also important to note that, again, as we're looking at Kiss at this point, that this is 74, and we're coming out of the glam era, the glitter era, that, of course, was a lot larger in Britain than it ever was in America.
Right.
So you're seeing a death to glitter or whatever, but you're seeing these groups that are coming up in the wake that have eclipsed, in a lot of ways, a lot of the British glam groups, these other British groups. But you can see it in their presentation. It is now filtered over. You're seeing a lot of the flash kind of, certainly like the costuming and stuff. And this is mainstream groups that are doing this now. I mean, you could certainly Elton John, but I think Elton John always had a foot in the glitter thing anyway. But
Elton was his own thing.
But it made me think of it by saying Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They're wearing kind of silvery glitter outfits on stage. Even the Rolling Stones at some point, all of a sudden Mick Jagger's on stage wearing eyeshadow, and they're wearing the frilly, multicolored clothes and stuff. So this influence is permeating into mainstream, and a lot of the vanguard groups, particularly in America, as we're seeing with the Dolls, are kind of getting chewed up and spit out and forgotten, while other groups are building off of their influence and their where they've spearheaded and broken the ground. Now the other groups are coming in and taking that ground and claiming it as their own.
Yeah.
This is the way it's always worked, but you're seeing it in a very explicit fashion.
And it's getting kind of darker too. And
it's very exemplified in the next song. But before we move on to that, Parasite, where does that land with you guys? Because we all basically agree we love that Got to Choose.
Great song. I mean, that's one
top
of the
3 probably for me.
Of all time or on the record?
On the record.
Okay, just asking. Yeah, I'd probably be in that same group. Anytime I'm on this record, that's one I can never skip. But no, exactly what you were saying. I think Going Blind almost is like the soundtrack for maybe the Death to Glitter, because that's like such a plodding song, and it's that's almost the antithesis of.
It comes from a different spot, though. That is that was a co-write with Steve Cornell.
Wicked Lester days, correct?
Wicked Lester, and an early songwriting partner of Gene Simmons. The connection of how they, Steve Cornell was who introduced Gene and Paul to each other. That is, and you can hear it if you're familiar with the group Mountain at all. And Steve Cornell said that was kind of his attempt to kind of rewrite theme for an imaginary Western.
I can see that.
You can totally see that, and
especially with the bass.
Yeah, and they just even that whole rolling melody, the way it all kind of comes together, and then you've got the crazy Gene lyric, that nonsensical. What does this mean? Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't have to.
So Paul takes credit for that line. You're 13, I'm 60, or whatever.
Well, that may well be true, but that would be feeding
I'm 93,
off of,
16. Yeah, that's what it is.
One thing that Gene does really well is just write nonsensical lyrics, and as long as it was outrageous and weird, then it worked. But I love this song. I have always loved this song. It's probably my favorite song on this album. I like the lead on it.
I love the bass line that's in it. That's one of my favorites. Super melodic.
Just the way, it's an eerie song.
I love the MTV Unplugged version.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic.
It's a good song. I think it's going to survive. It's, even a different interpretation depending on.
And even Bruce's interpretation wasn't bad, because it was a little bit more on the ones kind of solo and vibe.
Yeah. Well, what I like about it, the lead on the studio version here, it sounds to me, and this is guitar stuff that I'm not really qualified to say, but I know a little bit about. On a Les Paul guitar, you can toggle between the pickup on your neck to the pickup on your bridge.
Yeah.
And the bridge pickup is the hotter pickup. That's Ace's preferred spot. He never uses a neck pickup.
Yep.
Back, on his,
even though he had 3 at one point, never used any of those other 2.
No, the other ones, that was all for show. But I think he's using his neck pickup on this solo. It sounds like it's got that.
It has a bit of warmth to it.
Yeah, it's a lot different.
A little bit of honk, as they say.
It's just I always use the word tubular. It's like tubular, dude. But it has the whole album sounds like it's recorded through a tube. But I mean,
and I really like the effect they have on it, kind of like that open air kind of almost empty auditorium sound
the
to it.
reverb on it is really and it's kind of a spooky sounding song. It's got kind of I say gothic quality. When I say that, I don't mean like goth like
Bauhaus.
I mean like
but like the lyric content,
like
and all
old
that.
Hammer movie gothic kind of thing. So,
and the other thing I like on it too, talking about production aspect, I like the octaves they threw in after the solo when Gene cuts back in with the "'Cause I think I'm going blind." When the guitars pop back in, I swear there's one extra guitar doing an extra harmony on top of it, and it kind of adds like this cool octave effect.
That da 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 da. I know what you're talking about.
I mean, all of that works, I think, and it's all possible because they probably have a little more time and a little more space to experiment some in the studio than they did on the prior record. But again, they're also up against the clock. But
It's $300 an hour.
Yeah, so I don't know. So that follows into
Hotter than hell,
which is one of my least favorite Kiss songs ever.
It's in my bottom 3 from this album. I don't know.
I like the coda out.
I do too.
From the gong out. Yeah, yeah, that part. There's a song there.
Yeah,
I love that. But Hotter Than Hell, even when I was a kid, I remember thinking, this is kind of dumb, And it seems like, to me, it's like a half-baked idea that's been worked into a song, and somehow it became the title cut.
This is one of the first songs I heard where I went, where I learned that rock songs could be dumb.
Well, it's okay to be dumb, but there's a difference between, there's a fine line between stupid and clever.
Right, yes.
And this is just kind of stupid. It just doesn't...
Shall burn you like the midday sun.
Well, I mean, it just sounds like something that a junior high school guy would write, and I get that. That would be cool, but it just
totally
seemed like
that.
There's something more that could have been done and said there. I don't know.
Oh, no, I agree.
It's very, very...
And there's probably people listening to this going, fuck this guy. That song rules.
Oh, no,
Man,
well,
I love that song.
I'll get polarizing when we get into the mid-70s, trust me.
Yeah.
Because there's an extremely popular classic Kiss song that everyone loves that I can go the rest of my life and never hear again.
I have a very strong guess what it is, and I probably agree with it.
Okay.
That riff's kind of fucked up, too, isn't it? That dun-it.
No, I'm okay with even that.
The riff's cool.
I just think that, I guess lyrically is what really just bothers me about it. It just doesn't seem like, it doesn't ring true on any level to me, I mean, I guess it does, but it just...
It's very like, what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know, it just...
Very teenage jocular. I don't know.
It's very ham-fisted, kind of like,
yeah,
like I'm scraping for some lyrics here. This will work. Okay, let's go.
Mm-hmm. I feel that way on a song actually on the next record we were talking about today. We were doing some errands and we were listening to Dress to Kill in the car, and I was like, this is probably the stupidest lyric I have ever heard. But no, the only info I have on this is another Paul attribution. He attributes Free's song All Right Now was the inspiration for Hotter Than Hell.
I can see that.
I can see that. I have heard that before, but I mean, All Right Now is a better song.
Easily.
It just is.
Easily.
It's like a bad take on All Right Now.
So far, great album, bad title song.
It's not. It's just not a strong one. But that outro part is killer. That saves the song. I mean, that is just
Rip and Destroy.
Song. But Rip and Destroy was a better version of this thing.
Rip and Destroy.
Which we'll come to whenever we get to that part of the deal. But so
after that, we got Let Me Go Rock and Roll, a Simmons Stanley co-write with Gene singing, and probably also in my top 3 songs on the record, if not top 5 all-time favorite Kiss song. I love this track.
I do too.
I gotta say, I like it. I think it's got a lot of what they did really well in this era. Again, kind of a somewhat nonsensical lyric from Gene, but that's okay.
He's just making a kind of like a Chuck Berry rocker or a Slade Alive rocker.
Yeah, it's very kind of Slade. They're going for an anthemic quality. Let me go rock and roll. Just let's and then the
great Ace solos.
The Chuck Berry on speed kind of thing going on, and that's with the breaks and stuff. I mean, it harkens back to, and I don't mean this the way it probably going to sound, but it harkens back to kind of the 50s kind of rockabilly thing, kind of a
especially
3-chord repetitive, just
especially with that bass line.
It's a killer song. I'm surprised that it didn't get more legs, and obviously in its early incarnation live, it was the centerpiece of their show as their closer.
Was this not the single too?
I'm not sure what the singles were off of this. I didn't, I haven't got that in front of me. Do you know?
According to Wikipedia, it does claim Let Me Go Rock and Roll released October 22nd, 74 as the single.
Yeah, but that's all suspicious. Anything off of Wikipedia is kind of suspicious.
I'm mainly using Wikipedia just as songwriting credits and track listing.
Yeah, we kind of use it for talking points.
Yeah. And honestly, one of the more clever things I've ever heard them do production-wise is in this song. So the Chuck Berry on Speed part with Ace's solo. So you've got the and then go into the full solo. When he's doing the riff, when he does the slide, Gene slides on the bass with him.
Yeah.
And it adds this cool little boom. It's just, that's one of my favorite little things. And I honestly think, and even talking about a live version a little bit, that is probably one of the more well-orchestrated Kiss solo bits, because there's a bit where Paul is playing something completely different than what Gene is playing, and Ace is soloing on top, and Peter's just going fucking wild behind the kit. And to me, that just feels like one of the more better orchestrated jam solo sections they ever wrote.
You're seeing the band start to gel in this period in a way, I think, having been on the road, because again, you got to remember that going into that first album, they only played a handful of shows prior to that. I mean, relative speaking, they weren't playing regularly as often as a lot of the other New York bands were, which we discussed. So really, they're starting to gel as a band post first album. And you're starting to see this stuff come together more on the second album, and of course you're going to see it a lot more coming out of this album going into the third. But
they're like recording and performing together a lot in a year.
Yeah, so it stands to reason that this kind of stuff was going to become more prevalent.
Oh yeah. Well, now it's time to lift that needle, flip it on over, and when we get all the way launching us into side B. And honestly, Simmons right and lead vocal, very underrated. I think that song does not get the love it deserves.
When I was younger, I didn't like it as much as then I realized as I got older how much more I like it now, and I don't know what has brought me to the dance on that, but
I know what it did for me.
I really love it now.
That's kind of how I feel about this album.
I love the lyrics. Even though there's kind of like, high school type lyrics, there's something so charming about the chorus to that song. You just keep talking louder all the way to your mama and father. One of these days you'll push me all the way.
Like, it's just like I'm gonna kill you like Jason Voorhees or some shit.
Oh, I was hearing like a one of these days.
Oh, that too.
kind of thing.
Well, you say high school. I say, I think that teenage kind of thing was very important to them. I think everything was filtered through trying to appeal to a teenage mindset or a teenage audience. That's one of the weird dichotomies about this band, particularly in this era, is they. I don't think anyone quite knew where to put them, because you're seeing the advent of FM radio at this time, and they really aren't an FM type band. They're not the kind of band that would fit, neatly on an FM radio.
I feel like they
weren't
wanted
playlists
to.
probably so much on FM. I think so too, but I think they probably saw themselves as more of an AM rock band, which back then was top 40.
Right.
I think people today don't understand that there was a delineation between AM and FM back in the day, and AM was almost exclusively the domain of top 40 radio, whereas FM was considered a more progressive format.
Right. Allman Brothers, Grateful Dead.
And people could get away with
Rush.
playing entire album sides and such back then that you obviously would never have heard on AM. AM, you had your classic DJ, walking on the records between songs.
Donny Osmond and things like that, probably right.
And it was certainly, and I think Kiss were wanting that, but they really, because they're still, primarily kind of a pop-oriented band. They're not a Black Sabbath type of band. They're not really a heavy metal band per se.
Yeah.
They're being probably promoted as such in a way. I don't know, how prevalent the term heavy metal was in this era, but
I don't think necessarily from songwriting. Was like earlier when I mentioned Sabbath, I think they were just trying to go for that like sonic sound.
Right, I understand.
The dark
at
mood.
the same time, I don't think that even suits what Kiss is trying to do. I mean,
I don't
they're
think
very much a
necessarily
direct kind of hard rock kind of a thing. They're,
it was more of a party than a dark mood though.
Right. But I don't think they've fully fleshed out or developed the whole concept at this point. You can tell it's still being it's a work in progress, and they're kind of chomping at the bit, which kind of gives it its energy and its excitement, and they're trying to find exactly who it is they're going to be and how they're going to do things. And you can see it in, like I said, this album, was a little more disjointed as far as the songwriting. But like All the Way is got the potential to be, you could pull out a lot more heavier kind of a riff out of that than it is, but it's a little more slinky sounding. And again, I keep going back. It has kind of almost like an R&B kind of a vibe to it.
I can see that.
I don't know how I can describe that in a way that, if you understand what I mean, then there's no explanation necessary.
There's a certain vibe to that classic R&B that was kind of finger snappy that you kind of had. And if you deconstruct this song to a way where you want to relate it to R&B, you can absolutely hear it.
I think the idea is that they're trying to come up with something that was danceable.
And Paul and Gene were very vocal about those influences too.
Well, true, but I think the idea is, I think there was an unconscious understanding that if the song was danceable, then it might be playable on the radio, and that was paramount to them.
And also, I have to give huge props. One of the best Ace solos on the record too. Like when it just comes to that slinky looseness that you were talking about.
There's that one part where he just hits that one note and he's kind of got a kind of vibrato on it, just or whatever. And
while Peter's doing that,
but it doesn't scream. It's not a screaming kind of a thing. And
it was almost a mistake that, we just need to keep that.
Yeah. But it sounds like he's almost like losing the note. He's just holding it by just the tail end of the note itself, and it's just barely there. And it's like,
and even the notes coming back in still sound like a little bit of a struggle before you hear him grab it again for that outro.
And if it had that fluidity and skilled perfection behind it, like any other guitar player's hands, it wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't feel the same, and it wouldn't be right.
Wouldn't be Ace.
It certainly wouldn't be Ace.
There's a lot of great Ace moments on this record.
Yeah,
there really is.
Ace is really inspired on this, and we'll
even with the next one, we got "Watching You," another Simmons right and lead vocal.
Again, a song that probably still could even be heavier in a way, but in a way, if it had been, it might. Here's when opposites work. If it had gone heavier, it still wouldn't have been the same song. It might not have felt the same.
It's not because
it wouldn't be as direct.
I've unfortunately heard many a heavy metal version of this where they did the down tuning.
Yeah. This isn't Black Sabbath you're dealing with here, and this is how can I liken this? And I love Black Sabbath, but like a heavy metal band is giving you like full-on body punches to the ribs and the gut.
Right.
Kiss is going more like jabbing you in the throat. You know what I mean? In this song, and that's their strong punch.
There's still kind of a groove
their strong
to it
punch
too.
is a jab to the throat, and this is exactly what Watching You does.
Great riffs in this song, especially on the when he comes out of the "Everybody else is here watching you."
But just the riff, I like the riff.
Oh God,
Gene came up with a lot of those clever riffs. A lot of what like we've said where he dropped them in the middle of those Ace songs, and he doesn't take credit for them.
He's a great musician. Like I say musician, I usually just say bassist, but he's a great guitarist too. When he tries,
he's a great riff writer. For sure.
And it's like, people may chalk him up to marketing guy, money guy, but back here, yes, he may have had his eyes still set on the dollar signs, but he still had to have good material to back it up, and he was a songwriter, and it shows in this early stuff. And it's just really, really good.
I hear a lot of Led Zeppelin in these songs, with the riffs at least.
You can hear like maybe the riff from Heartbreaker.
A lot of Led Zeppelin too.
And probably, I don't know, in an odd way, I would say this next song is the outlier on the record.
I'd say it's the weakest track.
The weakest track.
I like it though.
We've got Mainliner.
No, it's not. It's pretty weak.
Or Mainline.
It's the softest one by far. But
written by Mr. Paul Stanley, sung by Peter Criss.
Yeah, this really comes out of left field on this record. It doesn't feel like a Kiss song, and I don't think it has anything to do with Peter Criss. I think actually, there's the lore where they were saying, well, Peter was going, I'm going to sing this song, or I'm going to quit, or whatever. Okay, you know what? So what if he did? Okay, you know what? There's no one else that should have sang this song.
Yeah,
Peter sings. It's the only saving grace to this song is Peter singing this, because if Paul sung it, it would have sucked.
Yeah,
because it's not a good song to begin with.
I will argue
and what saves it. Now this is my opinion, but in my opinion, what saves it is Peter, and it makes it a Kiss song because Peter has a feel for it that I don't think anyone else could have sang it.
Kind of has that Faces, vibe to it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Now, I'll agree with you. By using a song that's also on this record, I feel like Parasite wouldn't have had the same sort of punch it did if they had gotten Ace to sing it. Mr. Ace Frehley, that is shy about his vocal and doesn't quite sure what he's doing, this, that, and the other. I'm glad we got Gene doing Parasite on that versus an unsure Ace. With Mainline, though, I think it's a great guitar riff, and it's a good. I like the even the verse melody that na 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 na. It would be what this is. I hear big band in this one, like the pre-chorus. Girl, won't you let me on through?
Well, you got the R&B thing, yeah. But it might have been great for another band. I just saying for Kiss, and in context with these songs and this group of songs,
especially after watching you.
Oh man,
it's not.
I'll still have to rebel. This might be in my top 3. It's in my top 3. I'll say it. It's in my top 3.
Hey, I'll say this.
Top 3. All right.
I would rather Mainline though be on the first
record.
album. No, I would still rather have Mainline on the first album as opposed to Love Theme from Kiss.
Yep. Yeah. I'll take it.
I'll probably say this for every record. I'll be like, well, this might be the weakest song, but you know what? It could have been in place of Love Theme from Kiss and it'd been better.
Now is Love Theme probably your least favorite song from the 70s era?
Yeah, I don't understand it at all. I don't understand why would you do that.
80s Kiss because there's plenty that we can pick that's bad in there, but 70s,
it makes no sense why that even exists. But we're
not
deep
talking
into
about that
Hotter and Hell now. So where are we at? So next is Coming Home.
Coming Home, yes. The wrap up for me, what I'm used to is the wrap up, written by Frehley and Stanley, and of course Mr. Stanley is the lead vocal on it.
Ace Frehley getting a lot of co-writes on this, or 3 rather.
Yeah,
but
I wonder to what degree he contributed to this.
Well, from all accounts, from all of their books, and even what we were saying earlier, they were just in the back of that van, just riding around places and
not a van, a station wagon.
Station wagon, yes. And from the best of my knowledge, from what I've been able to kind of gather, researching and looking around, they were just spitballing riff ideas, lounging in the back there and in between shows. So maybe Ace was just always constantly bored and fishing out his guitar and throwing out riff ideas.
I don't know. It doesn't sound like an Ace riff to me.
It does sound like a song somebody wrote on an acoustic guitar, though.
I think his part to me sounds like the Walk Down, because think about like Fractured Mirror, of other stuff that showed up on the solo material. That sounds Ace.
I never thought of that. That's a good point.
And then Paul picks it up with his choppy
But I'll tell you this, even when I was a kid and had this record, this was a favorite song. I've always loved this song. And I'm surprised they didn't push this as a single.
And the acoustic version of this one that's on the Unplugged record is fucking great too.
Yeah. I thought I was really surprised when they opened their Unplugged thing with this. I thought that was a really cool thing to do. Mm-hmm. But because it's kind of a forgotten song, and I always thought it was a pretty strong song. And again, though, however, I have to qualify this along with Mainline. It's very much outside the structure of the rest of this album and sonically, as far as the songwriting style and everything. It's especially through that Hotter Than Hell filter. This is very bubblegum sounding. It's the most bubblegum sounding song on the record, and there's nothing wrong with that, because when bubblegum's done well, then it's great. I mean, who doesn't love bubblegum? But
indeed.
Let me ask you this: what do you feel?
If you see this sided next to, if you saw this song sandwiched between Parasite and Watching You, it would be a lot more pronounced how different it is from the rest of the songwriting. But the way they've sequenced it kind of works. But and I love the song. It's one of my favorite Kiss songs.
Mine too. Well, so I kind of, just to get your opinion, what do you feel that the overall vibe of this record is? Because just as a very, very fast recap, Got to Choose to me is just kind of classic choppy rock and roll riff. Parasite's a little faster, groovy. Going Blind is the slower, kind of heavier, quote unquote. Hotter Than Hell goes right back up to the Got to Choose kind of choppy kind of riffs. Let Me Go Rock and Roll expands on that. All the Way kind of drops it back down, but more in a poppy bubblegum aspect a little bit, still with All the Way in my opinion. Watching You goes back to a Parasite kind of attack. Mainline is closer to All the Way. Coming Home would be closer to All the Way in Mainline. So it almost feels like they kind of, at least with my perception of it, kind of hit on a bunch of different things and then called back to it throughout the record.
Well, that's why like I said, to me it feels disjointed.
It does, and it's because of what I just said.
It seems like what it is. It seems like they're reaching for ideas and fleshing out ideas without having fully developed them. You've got about, if I'm looking at it with hindsight, I'd say you have half an album here finished, and the other ones you've got starts on something that you might be able to do something with in another context later on.
Like Harder Than Hell.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well,
That's a good example.
But now you get to this last track.
Strange Ways.
Which is strange in a lot of different ways because it is a very un-Kiss-like song.
Very.
But it is flat out killer. It is a great song.
It's a dark little riff.
Everything they've done with this is pitch perfect on it.
Now, how do you feel? Like, I'll pull it back to my cassette tape again. This was track 2. So this immediately followed Got to Choose. Do you think that's a better placement for it?
No.
So coming out of that da-da-da-da,
now you're bringing up the idea of resequencing the whole album. Which,
no, not the whole album, just that one.
I know, but if versus what you have on that cassette to the album versus to how we would do it.
Right.
So no, I wouldn't place it there at all. But
I could hear it working though.
Okay.
I just I don't know how you would qualify this because this album is such an anomaly and it's such a mix of different ideas. But again, after 40 plus years, almost 50 years now of it, can you hear it any other way? Can it be done any other way? Should it be done any way? No, it shouldn't. Now it is what it is. It's Hotter Than Hell, and it's perfect as it is.
Should it? No, the Polygram did it anyway.
We can armchair quarterback and second guess this all day long, and that's part of the fun of this.
Yeah.
But would I want it any other way? Probably not. So, and you've got, and again, Strange Way seems like to me it's the perfect closer for this. It's it's a dark song and it's got that crazy lead in it that is like probably Ace's best lead. It sounds like he's playing through a wah or at least a half cock,
kind of like a cock wah,
and so it's something that's really unusual and it makes it's probably not even really all that unusual. What makes it unusual is, like you said, it's playing through the half-cocked wah, and you've got that kind of weird style to it that it's just unlike anything else really that he would do.
Yeah, it's just an Ace solo writing credit by himself on that one.
And why did this song not ever make it to the stage? It seems like it's tailored for them to play live.
From my recollection of Gene's book and then revisiting Paul's recently, from what I understand, this was almost a pity song that was put on the record. Like, they weren't wanting to make this part of it, but I've heard a couple different things. So there's going to be a little bit of hearsay, but one side of it, I heard there was going to be a long, a live type drum solo, and that almost caused them to leave. And then Gene was originally going to sing this, and then this was another where he went, I'm singing this or I quit. There's been a whole bunch of conjecture on a bunch of different stuff to the point where they kind of made it the last track as here, will you shut up?
Yeah, but so what? You know what? It's still a strong song, and you'd have to know that.
I can see
even
just
that
Gene and Paul getting a stick
it,
up their ass and just not doing it because of it.
I'm just saying that's selfish and stupid. It doesn't matter who's being selfish. Somebody is somewhere. The point is from a fan perspective, you're looking at it going, gee, that would have been a really killer song to have to see them do live.
To showcase Ace and Peter singing, and
as opposed to still playing leftover songs like Life in the Woods or Acrobat.
Joke.
But now that leaves the packaging and the marketing behind this record, how they came to put together this album cover. It's very unusual. The album cover was designed by a guy named John Van Hammersveld.
That's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. Now, what's important.
Both the front and the back?
Yeah, well, he did not the photography, but the layout and the design. And it was his idea, I believe, to do the Japanese Asian motif, whatever.
Yeah, the manga. if you will.
Yeah, I don't.
That's what I read it
Be
was.
careful, Cap. You don't want them coming after us.
I know
You say
it.
the wrong thing, and we're going to be attacked.
There's only one thing worse than a Kiss nerd.
That's an anime nerd.
It's an anime nerd.
The Something Good Network apologizes for Captain Nunn if he did refer to the wrong side of that. You can forward all emails to.
That's right. I'm a Rush fan too. It's all good.
The statements made by Captain Nunn of Captain Nunn do not necessarily reflect this. No, but you've got this guy, John Van Hammersveld, who designed the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour cover, and you can see how close those relate. But he also did most famously Exile on Main Street for the Rolling Stones.
And that's a collage too.
And that's a really cool album cover. And so what's interesting to me is he also did the Endless Summer movie poster.
I'll have to look
which
up
is a
what that looks
very
like.
stark kind of graphic. It's a famous stark graphic kind of thing.
I'm sure if I look it up, I'll recognize it immediately.
So this guy has some pretty big stuff under his belt, and so somebody somewhere, obviously at Casablanca, saw that there might be something, usable with this guy, and I can't imagine, rather as opposed to going with someone unknown, although. I don't recall ever seeing his name on the cover. I might be wrong.
I didn't have a budget either, And
then they had Norman Seeff, who was a famous photographer, come and do all the photography for it.
I was going to say, anytime I've looked up information on the Hotter Than Hell graphics, I always find stories about that infamous photo shoot,
Right.
Of Paul getting himself locked, or Gene locking Paul in the car to protect himself, all this stuff. And we, of course, hear stories about the first record. We hear stories about Dressed to Kill, with it being coin suits. I never hear much about the making of the Hotter Than Hell cover.
It's it's curiosity, because I don't know where they came up with this whole Japanese idea. And
Maybe
it
it's just
seemed
the whole idea of the kabuki makeup.
Well, that's what I think probably inspired the Hammersfeld, or Van Hammersfeld, or however you say his name.
Artist.
So he probably was inspired by that to a degree, and took that and ran with it.
And they kind of started keeping it on drum kits later on, like on Eric Carr's kit and everything, little Japanese motifs.
That one symbol, the
chakra.
Chakra, whatever
that's
you say.
on the center.
We're a bunch of North Carolina boys. We don't know these fancy words.
Might have been maybe a Gene thing too, because he was into kaiju and things like that.
I have no clue. He can say that after the fact. Who's to say where he was at the time?
Well, of course it was me.
And you don't know that they had much say or enough clout to have much say in these things at this point. They could have just been solely discretionary on the part of the record company, going, "Here's your album. Here's what the cover is."
I think, and honestly, I love the cover. I think it's great.
It's unusual. I always thought it was a weird looking cover. I did, it's just so different from anything else they would ever do. But
also a production graphic nerd guy thing. 2 records back to back where their band image is in black and white.
Yeah. It's odd that the cover shot is in black and white where everything else is so colorful.
Although that works for a cool contrast. But then again, with Dressed to Kill, that album cover was black and white also. So that was 2 back to back for a band that was so flashy. Even though they wanted to do black, white, silver studs, Paul had red lipstick on, and Peter had a little bit of that
colored picture.
Exactly, but the next one didn't, nor did the follow-up. I do find it interesting that, even though they wanted black and white, silver kind of vibe, they weren't trying to bring out the pop of green in Peter's eyes, or the red and the lips and stuff.
Gotten to the green at that point, but I can't remember.
You're true.
But if you flip the album over, they're wearing outfits on the particularly Gene. Is something that you never ever saw him ever wear in any other. Where did he find that? What was the point of that? Where were they going with that?
I did hear that those were because they were kind of making their own costumes at that point. That was kind of just test costumes just to see, stuff.
I've never heard a story behind that. I didn't know if maybe that was something that was brought in by the photographer.
Yeah, because I know Lydia helped in the early days with some costumes. There were other independent leather helpers that were doing stuff, and I want to say that might have just been some concepts that they were working up that they eventually trashed.
It's a cool costume. I don't know why I could see him using that. I wish he'd used it more.
I think from the album cover on the inside, the one image that sticks out with me is the big group photo where Gene's in the top right corner with his cape spread. There we go.
Now we got a visual aid that no one can
Well, I was
look at.
hoping
looking for that today.
Anyone that wants to pull out their copy of Fire and Hell can look at it.
There's nothing on the inside.
Okay.
They didn't press anything on the inside back in those days.
Okay. But yeah.
But no, yeah, so Paul's outfit, so if listeners have their album pulled up or if they have their Google pulled up,
Paul's basically just wearing his, he's from the waist up. And I mean, Ace is wearing this sort of, I mean, all of it looks still very Asian. And if you didn't know who Kiss were at that point and you're picking that up for the first time, you could look at that and just go, is this like a Japanese band?
Yeah.
You know, who knows? But, you know, I think they were just going for that whole sense of curiosity and the outrageousness of it, and they were hoping that maybe the album cover in and of itself would be a sell point for someone that may not know who the band was, because they're still breaking them.
And it kind of helps with a little bit of the dangerousness too, because this was also the same era that they did that photo shoot with the girl where Peter had the dagger and everything else.
Well, that is something to notice. You've got a nude woman on the back, and her nipples obscured by a well-placed star, which is obviously after the fact. That's something you would never see post 1978 Kiss. Or even 77 Kiss for that matter. I mean, there's a point where, you know, at this point, their audience that they think is their audience still seems to be more of a high school kind of, a little bit older. They're not geared towards little kids as they would be so.
It's like what Alex was saying.
Rightfully accused later on.
There's a sense of danger to it still.
Yeah, I think that. I don't even know if it's so much the idea of danger is just a generalized sense of outrage. They just are trying to be as outrageous as possible to attract as much attention as possible.
Yeah.
And, you know, without a lot of thought being probably put into it.
I still think it looks super cool. I think the back cover looks cooler than the front of it.
Yeah, honestly, I'd fully agree with that.
Well, that brings us up to the Hotter Than Hell album, and I guess it's a good place to close. As we come out of this, we'll look at
the 2 or 3 months they were on the road before Dress to Kill.
Dress to Kill. So, you know,
the later episodes I feel are going to be a little bit more like in sync with, like we can just basically go like it was 76 and the band started. These first few episodes are going to be a whole.
They were
lot
playing with Argent.
It's a lot of the process because they're always on the move. They're always touring, and this is only a short break before they're going to return to the road, and we'll pick up with that on the next episode. So hopefully you've been enjoying this, and we'll continue the ride as we carry on through the history of Kiss, album by album, year by year, and in this case, tour by tour. And
have some fun with it.
Hopefully having some fun with it. So for Alex Stiff, Cap Nunn, I'm Russ Ward, and we will see you next time on No Time to Turn.
Thank you for listening. Please insert another coin by supporting the show for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/somethinggoodnetwork.